Hey guys, it's about time for the first garden tour of the year, and it's a bit smoky, and we're also expecting quite a heat wave here in the next couple of days. So I'll walk you through what I've done to help the plants adjust to that. First, we'll take a look at the greenhouse. So you'll notice there's some shade cloth up on the inside. That's mostly for my own benefit, and also I'm trying to keep the sun off the stones a little bit in here. That just keeps the temperature a little bit cooler. When the stones get really hot, it can just become kind of an oven. As you maybe can tell, there's still a ton of tomato plants in here. They're all looking a little bit sad because I've given them a hard time, but I still have about 100 tomato plants, and I don't know if there's anybody left that wants to buy them at this point, but oh well. I've sold a fair few, so it's all right. And my winter tomatoes up here are making fruit. I let this pot dry out relatively thoroughly between waterings so that the fruits will actually ripen. Otherwise, they just stay green forever. As far as how things are doing down here, lettuce is doing really good. Right here, it's getting a lot of shade. So they're doing all right. They're not getting quite so hot as they would in the south end of the greenhouse. And the tomatoes that I've planted in here are really looking really good. They're about ready for me to take off the lower branches and to start training them up the wire. Some of them are. Some of them are a little bit farther behind. But probably in a week or two I'll start training them up. And there's some beautiful flowers. So in this farthest bed I have melons that'll drape over the front of the beds, and the tomatoes will go up the wire, and that way we'll get good sun coverage for everything. Now you may notice all sorts of blotches and streaks. Part of my sun heat wave protection method here is to apply a shading solution to the exterior of the greenhouse. And this shading solution is, it's basically just a lime wash. It washes off by about towards the end of the season, and I'll reapply if necessary. But if it was a sunnier day, it'd be easier to see, but I'll show you what the roof looks like. You can see the light kind of passing through it. So I'm looking for an opacity maybe 50 to 60% off the beginning here, just because it's a heat wave. A lot of this is going to wash off, and some of it might even sort of flake off in the next little while. I did apply this already once earlier in the year, but because there was so much dust and ash on the roof, it actually didn't stick. So here's a look at the outside. And I might insert a little video in here to show you how I've applied. I'm going to try to get each panel even coating. Just let it wash back. Hit it to the roof, but it looks like a pretty good covering. There's definitely still some dust and ash on the roof. You can see it's still a little bit yellow, whereas the lime wash solution is a semi-transparent white. So, but it's sticking better. I washed the roof off pretty well yesterday, so hopefully that does the trick. Please excuse if you can hear any fire machinery in the background. My neighbors are working their fields over, it looks like. But here's the garden. There's a bird bath right about there, and I have to fill that thing. The birds empty it out about once a day, just having baths in there. I'm not sure if they bathe more when it's smoky or not, but they definitely seem to have been really, really appreciating the consistent source of water. Maybe do a little quick once over of the crops. So the peas have been seeded for quite some time. The beans are just coming up, and I of course have a very healthy crop of weeds. This is lamb's quarter, also called pigweed. And this is technically not a weed, but it did not get planted here. This is calendula that overseeded from the flowers I had in here last year. I also have one little way in that corner, loofah, so I'm not sure if he'll do well or not. But the carrots are starting to look really nice. They came in relatively thickly. I just seeded this by hand. I just sort of carefully tried to distribute the seed across the surface there. My snow peas are coming in really nicely, so I'm working on some fencing. You can see this is just a square knot, and I'll use that to build a fence. I know these get pretty tall and they're pretty tough, so I've got some bigger bamboo on the ends just to give it extra support. And my corn is just starting to come up. This is the last thing I seeded in the garden because they tend to like warmer soil, and the soil is just taking a little longer to warm up than some of the other things. So it looks like we've got our first cucumber baby. Yay! And I'm definitely going to need to move this kale because it's too close together. It's too close to the tomatoes. It'll take all the energy from this area. But one of the things I wanted to show you is how I am providing shade to my lettuce crop. Lettuces and spinach are the most heat sensitive things in my garden, so I have just very simply stuck in a couple of bamboo skewers, and these are some burlap wraps that I have for cedar trees, and it's just very, very simply constructed. In this case I have two bamboo stakes, and I have just slid a old feed bag over top of that, and that's creating the shade. We got a fresh crop of spinach right here, which is very, very prone to just going immediately to seed, even this small. So giving a bit of cover will help. And it looks like I need to treat these guys before they've been completely decimated. This is not cabbage worm damage. This is the fly. Probably, I'm not sure if it's the same one that eats the roots, but I'll maybe look into that. Again, there's corn. The leeks are doing really well. They were planted in a very deep hole, and I've slowly been backfilling, so there's probably about, 2.5 inches left. And then I can mound the dirt up further. Once the sheaths sort of get to a certain height, you can sort of fill them in a little bit more. And then you can mound the soil up around the bases as well to create a larger blanched area on the stem. And by blanching in that sense, we mean the exclusion of light rather than the application of heat. The onions are looking all right. The ones I got from the greenhouse or from the local nursery look really good. The ones I started myself look okay. They're definitely not as far along. And I am growing something new this year. This is called a lychee tomato. It's sort of in the same family as ground cherries and tomatillos. So I'm curious to see how they do. And all of this lettuce has overseeded. None of this was planted intentionally, but it's so beautiful. And I actually watered last night with the anticipation of picking as much as I could off of these this morning. If you have bitter lettuce, That's one of the ways to make the lettuce as sweet and as crisp as possible, is to water well at night and then pick in the morning when the leaf has as much water in it as possible. The other thing to do, as I've mentioned before, is to give it a 10-minute soak in a bath with a little bit of baking soda. It just helps to suck out a little bit of that bitterness. But so I'm planning to harvest as much of this as I can, because this is not going to get protected. It's all over the garden in places that it's not going to be allowed to stay long term. For now is fine, but given the heat that we're going to get, I expect quite a bit of it to turn rather bitter. So please excuse my fingers in the camera. As you can see, these guys, these are also spinaches. They have been exposed to the sun up until now, and they have already started going to seed. All of this is self-seeded, so some of it is doing better than others. The later comers are doing all right, and I think with some shade they'll be all right. That's a tree. That is not a weed. That is not. Yeah, that's a whole tree. It's got a really woody root. So I'm hoping to save some of the spinach as well. I'm not too worried about peas in general. This is a different variety than the others. You can tell how very frilly it is. Generally the peas handle it pretty all right as long as they've got enough moisture. And if it's not, if it was going to be plus 40s, I would probably shade both peas and cabbages as well. But since it's only going to be high 30s, I think, or mid 30s, we'll be all right without a cover for those. If you're noticing any pellets in my garden, it's not poo, it's just chicken pellets, chicken manure pellets that I've laid down just to give a little extra fertilizer. No animals have been in the garden. Potatoes are coming in all right. There's so much lettuce in this garden, and I'm not mad about it. So these are the tomatillos. They're handling it pretty good. They're flowering already. Of course, they're not going to actually make any fruit quite yet. Also got some ground cherries coming in. So these are all in the same family as that lychee tomato, with slightly variant tastes, as well as variation on exactly how the fruit grows inside the husk. Now, for the lower garden, as you can see, it's not quite looking like you may have expected, because we have in fact purchased some lumber. We started working on some of the designs I had in mind, but using all poplar cut was going to take a lot longer. It was going to take a lot more energy, and it wasn't going to do as good a job of holding in the dirt with the weaving structure that I had intended. Even these have, especially at the beginning, let a lot of dirt in through, and lots of dirt sits sort of in the middle and allows weeds and things to grow through. So we decided to scupper that plan, as they say. Oh, incidentally, I have a wonderful crop of volunteer snow peas coming in, and they look like they're going to be ready before anything I planted on purpose, because of course they are. I'm not intentionally letting them grow, but I'm also not trying very hard to kill them. So we'll see what happens. We'll maybe let some of them grow. Looks like we've got some bindweed in here as well. We'll definitely make a point of picking those. And I'll probably just come in and hoe across the surface of this. But I've decided on a variation of the designs I showed you. I can't wait to see it in the full thing. But for now, this is a bit of a sneak peek. And one of the things we did was put in this deck board on top, and that gives us a lovely little perch to sit on, to weed, to access, and just to appreciate everything. And having that seating available also means that I can make my paths a little bit narrower. They don't need to be 3 feet wide because I don't have to worry about getting a stool in here. I can just sit on the provided deck board, and because this is a treated wood called barefoot brown. It's not actually in contact with the soil, but modern day treated wood is not treated with arsenic and therefore is safe around food. I don't know if I would necessarily want to grow an entire bed full of treated wood because I'm not sure what other compounds are in there and how they would affect growth, but it's no longer treated with arsenic, and so it is safe. And because of the way that it is treated here, where it's going to get watered on quite a bit, it's not going to immediately rot. The thing that we've done on the untreated wood that we've made the beds with is, as you may be able to tell, we went ahead and charred them. We could probably have charred them a little bit more, but charring actually provides a waterproofing effect as well as a preservation effect. So I'm hoping that will give us a little bit more longevity. And of course, the lumber that we have cut in the past. It's looking pretty good. Some things in here are doing better than others, but this new soil is very sandy and clayey as well, so it's going to take a little while. It's going to take a few years really to build up some organic material in it in order to provide some of that moisture retention as well as good loam, right? And these are some volunteer beans that really are looking pretty nice. Some of these I'm like tempted to transplant because there's so many of them, and some of them look really good. I might just leave them where they're at and throw a stake or two in to give them something to climb and see if we get beans off of these guys before we get beans off the ones I seeded. But we got a bed full of cabbage and cauliflower and broccoli and spare onions and just about anything else I can think of. There's a bunch of Chinese cabbages in here that I'm very excited for. I want to try my hand at making kimchi, but we'll see how that goes. And I've got to show you this beautiful lilac. It's called a Canada lilac. The outsides are supposed to be almost red. I mean, it's more of a pink color, but you know, license and naming, I guess. And then the interior of the flower is much more pale. And the swallows, the swallowtail butterflies have been loving this bush. Some of these blooms are already nearly done, whereas there's so many left to come. They just look glorious. Wind's picking up. It is definitely getting pretty smoky. If you live somewhere where you're experiencing smoke, stay hydrated. Stay indoors as much as possible. One of the things you'll notice earlier is I was wearing a wrap on my head. One of the things that I've noticed is that the smoke tends to cling to hair and also natural fibers. So I try to wrap my hair so that when I go inside I can take the wrap off and my hair doesn't stink. The pumpkins are doing pretty good. The smoke is giving them a little bit of sun coverage at the moment, and because we're expecting a heat wave, I might be a little more concerned about them, but there's the sun way up there. We can look straight at him. He's orange. Sky's pretty gray. You can see sort of through the distance how the layering works. It looks better on camera than it does in real life. At least at the moment it's not too smelly. If it's very smelly, I don't come outside. It gives me a migraine. Some people have asked if smoke affects the plants or if it makes them feel sick, or how it affects the plants. So I figured I'd answer that shortly here, especially for those who have perhaps not experienced heavy smoke before. For the most part, it does not make your plants sick. The biggest effect it's going to have is on photosynthesis. If the plants aren't getting as much direct sunlight as they're usually do in order to create the sugars that the plant needs to grow. So what you will notice is that your hot season crops, your tropical plants, tomatoes, cucumbers, pumpkins, melons, peppers, and even to some extent things like potatoes, are going to be slower in a very smoky climate, because they're not getting the sun hours that they normally get, and so they're maturing at a more slow rate because they're not experiencing as much sunlight. They will not get sick. They don't hate CO2. They need CO2 in order to photosynthesize, of course. So they will otherwise be fine. That being said, if you notice that there's a lot of dust or ash or residue on the leaves of your plants, it can be a good idea to gently wash them off. If you are in a very humid area, you might want to be more careful about that, because adding water to the leaves can cause fungal issues. Where we're at, it's usually so dry that the plants will dry within a half hour very quickly, very easily. That being said, if you live somewhere where it is more humid or you do have more fungal issues, I would suggest washing your plants off in the morning rather than at night, so the water's not sitting on them all night long, and that way in the morning they can get watered, and then as the sun comes up, it'll dry off the plants relatively quickly without burning them in the mid-afternoon heat. That's not a great idea, especially if you're in a very in a heat wave. Of course, at the moment, our sun is not going to be giving these plants terribly much heat as it is, so we have a heat wave coming, but it's not going to be burning the plants so much, because there is kind of a giant blanket over the area as far as the sun is concerned. So they will not get sick. They will grow a little bit slower. You can help that along in these cool spring nights by giving them something like a cozy coat, or even just a black bucket with the bottom cut off of it to sit around your tropical plants to keep them warm overnight. Or you could also use things like frost cloth or shade cloth to trap in the heat a little bit, and that will help them adjust to how cool it is overnight. But I'm both cold and smoked, so I am gonna go inside, but thanks for coming along, and we'll see ya.